Good morning. My name is Christopher Fisher, and this is in completion for our interview section of our superintendent program. In anticipation of that, I've reached out to Superintendent McAlvin, and he has graciously accepted my invitation for an interview. And with that information and being passed along, we're going to go ahead and start our process. I really wanted to focus in on finding some information about how in the superintendency, especially in your district, how you build a strategic plan for reaching all of your student demographics, your participants that are on your campuses, your administrators, your central office, and how you strategize that with the relationship to your board, as well as building community support. So in that, our series of questions will really dive into those types of topics and questions that really focus in on helping me better understand the quotient of that for the superintendency itself.
Sir.
Before we get started, Superintendent McAlvin, do you have any questions or concerns about the interview?
No, sir, not at this time. Looking forward to it.
And with that, are you providing consent for the recording of the interview, as well as potential transcripts and data that is taken from this if necessary?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Before we get started, once again, I want to thank you for your time. I know that in your job, it's quite a feat to silo enough time for an interview like this during the day. So I definitely appreciate it. So our first question: how do you create a community and district-wide culture based upon improvement while planning strategically for the future?
Well, Chris, I think it all starts with trust. And I think trust is something that we often overlook a lot of times in leadership roles. People need to trust not only each other, but themselves. And then they need to trust that other people are doing their job. So one thing that I really try to instill in our district is a level of trust. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. If we're not going to do things this way, then we're not going to do things that way. And when we come across situations where we aren't doing the things that we said we were doing, we adjust and make changes. Trust comes transparency. So I can't keep things hidden. So the bad and the ugly have to come out. So the only way to, in my opinion, to be able to continue to make improvements is to be transparent and, take care of what's not right and fix it. And the only way to do that is let everybody know what you're struggling with. I think honest dialogue. A lot of times we tend to sugarcoat things as a leader, especially those leaders that are disconnected several levels, maybe from the teaching staff. For example, I don't evaluate teachers, but I have opinions about their teaching styles or how they do things. So it's important for me to have honest dialogue with the principals and those that are evaluating those teachers and those other staff members. So only way to do that is to be honest and say, hey, look, this isn't happening. How can we make it happen? And so I think that's a big part. And then I think consistency. I think if we treat people fairly, treat people the same, we're consistent in how we handle ourselves, that modeling that. My hope is it pays off and it trickles down through the system where we're all consistent with how we approach it, whether it's with kids, other parents, community, board, it doesn't matter, that we all are saying at least something similar and we're consistent in our approach. And so you had kind of a caveat at the end of your sentence, your question dealing with the future. Well, I'm fairly new to being a superintendent. I've been with the district 21 years, but only superintendent for 2. And but I've seen a lot of superintendents come and go and a lot of staff come and go. And when my opinion about the future is obviously it's unknown, but the only thing that I've seen that works is that you take a holistic approach and you kind of take things one step at a time. You're not trying to change too much too soon. And so community has to familiarize themselves with the subtle changes that you make so that they can take it in themselves, meaning they need to be able to absorb it as well. So what we try to do is make small, subtle changes. So I think when you prepare for the future and you strategically plan, it's a cycle that you follow, a system that you follow, so that you don't, I use this word all the time, but stub your toe and hurt yourself along the way. You want to take smooth, methodical steps and respond similarly, whether it's an emergency and or if it's a something you have time to make decisions on. Slow and steady wins the race. So that's kind of how we approach it here at Orangefield, and how I've seen success take place over time, not immediate. Even though we do see some things immediately, most of it is over a long period of time.
Well, I appreciate that response in terms of the strategic planning concept. I really acknowledge the transparency, consistency, and overall focus from a holistic approach. Kind of building upon that, how do you take that holistic approach and align your operating plans to achieve those specific strategic outcomes?
Good question. So what I try to do is a needs assessment. So I try to work with the administrators who have the boots on the ground, and we analyze whether it's student test data, campus success, teacher turnover, demographics of the students, whatever's happening. Are we seeing a transition in some areas? Are we staying the same? Special ed population, is it going up? Is it going down? Is it staying flat? So you take all those things into consideration, as well as some, that's a lot of cold, stale data, like very clinical, but you also need some soft, social data. So we try to get feedback as much as we can from the staff. But that we take that data and we bring it to our board of trustees. And I think most people that do a good job include their board of trustees. I call them our team of 8. That's a common term used, superintendent plus the 7 board members. And we set goals. So I usually present them our problems or concerns. We have 4 or 5 generic goals, and then we have some required goals that are put out by the state that the board has to act on and adopt. And then we regularly review them. I try to have goals tied to all of our actions that we take. And that goes for not only with our board of trustees, but also with my staff. Whether it's, I have in our district, our hierarchy set up with directors and then principals, and kind of go from there. So I have a group of directors that oversee different departments. So most all of our planning and strategizing and starts with that director principal level, and then it kind of goes vertically and then back to up and down between the board, myself, and the team. That's pretty common. We spend a lot of time in discussion about what's working, what's not working. We try to trim the fat, as they say. Anything that isn't working, we need to get rid of and not continue to waste our time and spin our wheels. And then I'm all about making adjustments along the way, but those adjustments need to be data driven. So I'm not going to give up on a project or give up on an idea because it didn't work the first time out. It may need a slight adjustment. We keep going. And I'm definitely not a flavor of the month person. So if you're a director within our district and you come to me with all these ideas once a month, we're going to change this, we're going to change that, chances are I'm going to say, have a good day. We're sticking to the plan. So whatever we do is going to be usually well planned out, and we're going to fight as long as we can to make it work, but adjust along the way. So that's kind of how we do it. And it's a lot of give and take, back and forth, sacrifice this for this. Ultimately, it comes down to what's best for kids.
And you speak about that, what's best for kids. And I know that those needs assessments really, as you explain, really break down where they need to be at, and from a student achievement standpoint. Just to kind of build upon that, how do you monitor the critical indicators to support all of your students achieving at grade level or above?
Well, we use formative and summative assessments. So I don't think that you can overlook the importance of the student's progress without using some kind of measure. So teachers, you check for understanding all the time. They use a lot of different strategies in the room, but until they put paper to pen or computer keys to monitor software, whatever method we're using, I do believe that the formative assessments are huge, and I believe the teacher's feedback is huge. So what we try to do is take little baby steps along the way and insert what we would consider to be small strategic samples of time in which kids are performing some type of test or some type of assessment at the end of the 6 weeks, whatever it may be. And it's usually taken for a grade, but it's not a test. It's like a daily grade. And so to put a little teeth on it, and what teachers do is they help. It's kind of a hybrid. They design a few questions, and then we have some sample questions, and then hopefully that aligns well with the TEKS and what was taught in the classroom, and we get a good feel for what the kids are doing. For example, special education. They are held to very similar standards and more so than what they've ever been held to. If you probably remember back, Chris, you might have been involved with the locally designed assessments before they started working with the state of Texas, started putting these specialized tests in that were a little bit more. Well, we were when those things came into play and they did away with those locally designed assessments, we were like, well, what are we going to do? But over time, our students have lived up to it and have stepped up to the plate and started taking care of that. Now, we don't have a tremendously high passing rate by all special ed students at all grade levels, but we do see progress. But those are the things that we look at. So we know our special ed scores need to be improved. We know our economically disadvantaged students need to improve. So we will strategically do things. And Chris, we get down to the nuts and the bolts. We'll get to like, it's 3 kids in this grade level. If we can get them to approaches on the STAR exam or the EOC, whatever it may be, we've done something. And so we'll get it down to 3 or 4 kids, and we're not going to not work with the others, but we may do something strategic with those kids to get them there because they're right on the bubble. So we'll go down to that level, that granular level sometimes. And in some subjects, it's real 10,000 foot because a lot of kids are successful in certain subjects. So we're not going to waste our time there. We're just going to be consistent and continue to do things we do and kind of be on the lookout for changes coming from the state or whatever. But just like every other district, we have our hot spots. And so we have to work each year and come up with ideas and better strategies to meet those kids. We've had several hurricanes hit our area, just like in the Houston area where you're at. And so we've lost a lot of school time. And so we have to make that time up. And then, of course, COVID and things like that have factored into that. So it's very important that we have a system in place to test our students and to see where we're at. And, there's a toll on teachers and administrators when those things happen. But I feel like our district has done a good job with that. But so I think for the most part, you can't get away from the tried and true methods of formative assessment. Now, secondly, you have summatives. And so a lot of that's done by the state, but we do have grade levels that aren't tested. So we're not just, a lot of times we get focused on those core classes, but, I want our CT programs to be successful. I want our fine arts to be successful and all those other areas. So it's important that those teachers too have bought into, the understanding for those students as well, and that they are engaged and involved in both summative and formative assessment. So that's kind of that's probably the Sunday school answer, but I truly do believe in those formative, where you go through, you find out where your weaknesses are, you use the data to help you improve. A lot of our tests are tied back to, you can actually go back and see question 1, 50% of the kids got it. So you can go back and follow up with that objective and go from there. So,
sorry.
No, that's good. I was just saying that's how we usually approach it.
Right. So with that being said, I thought there were some really good points in there. The going from the granular to 1,000-foot view at various points, as someone that's coming from a curriculum background as an administrative background as well, I can truly appreciate that. And the viewpoint of moving and progressing through either of those indicators and supporting all of the students achieving, I wanted to ask, how do you communicate that success? I know you, as you acknowledge that it takes all of you, it's a holistic approach. How do you, from your office, communicate that to the teachers, to the community about these, about supporting and indicating the student achievement procedure that you guys are going through?
Well, good question. So I think it starts within, right? I've been out of the classroom for a long time. So I'd be foolish to walk into a meeting and start telling teachers how to teach and what they should do and what they shouldn't do, because they're not stupid. They know that, I haven't taught in probably 17 years. But so I think it's important to get their feedback and listen, whether it's through survey, through conversation, maybe vicariously through directors and other support staff. I think listening is a big deal, not just with teachers, but with all the groups. I'm a big firm believer. I have 2 ears and 1 mouth. The ratio is listen more, talk less. So in my role, I do a lot of listening and taking in, and then you have to filter, what's complaining versus what's really the problem. And I'm a fixer. So as soon as I hear it, I want to go and solve it. But so you got to make people, and I hate to say this, but you have to make people believe it's their idea sometimes for change to take place. So if you have so when you reach out to teachers, you listen, you talk, you make some mental notes, and you follow up. That goes the same with parents. We have meetings, and most districts should have these types of meetings or something similar, but we do site-based decision-making in our district, and we also have district-level decision-making. So I use the site-based decision-making as a tool to get feedback, because that representation is usually nominated from the campus, as well as includes community members, parents, and and students at times have been involved in those meetings. So we actually do use those. I expect our principals to manage that at least 1 meeting a semester, if not more. And so I think the feedback from there, where we review the campus plans and we look at where money's being spent, we look at this goal or that goal, I think those are important, how they align to the district goals. Parent feedback sometimes is through surveys or just through interactions with them. I go to a lot of functions, and so they bend my ear, as they say sometimes, and I'm able to get good information sometimes. Not I got you information, just more people's thoughts and feelings. So I do, and matter of fact, I do have several meetings by campus coming up in the near future where I plan to almost like brainstorming session and just let it all hang out and get people's opinion and see how we're doing. And I think it goes back to that transparency and honest dialogue. I want that to be a commonplace in our district. So often the communicating is bottom up, top down. I consider it to be a two-way street. So there's not really edicts coming from my office. I don't just send out a new executive order every week or whatever. I usually take data, listen, hear, formulate a plan, and I usually allow my directors or principals to disseminate that. So it isn't always top down. And I don't like principals doing things that they don't believe in. So part of my job is not only to get buy-in on knowing that there's a problem, but also getting buy-in to believing our solution will work. And I'm big on, if you have a problem, you need to at least provide me a couple solutions. Because if I'm making all the decisions or I'm helping you solve all the problems, I'm really not preparing our administrators for the future. So that's kind of my approach to communication. And, it's probably a cliche, but I have an open door policy. I mean, I have disagreements with my staff. They disagree with me. But usually when we walk out the doors, we're on the same page.
I think that's a great, I think you explained that very well, thoroughly. I know there were a couple of things that really stood out to me in your explanation of the communication process was really a commitment to consensus and a commitment to inclusion from all levels. And with that, I want to understand a little bit more. As you said, you do hold them accountable. And there is a measure of accountability that is required from your position, and even when you bring in have a consensus model there, that there is a checks and balances, and as you said, you're in the next few weeks you're going over to the campuses and just kind of looking and observing and building up a understanding of how things are being implemented. So I just wanted to take this for our next question. How do you hold personnel accountable for developing and implementing the school improvement plans at each of your campuses? I know you said you're going to visit, but can you give me a little bit more information about how that plans out?
Well, I think it starts with me and how I'm consistent with them. So I used that word consistency a few questions ago. But if I have a meeting, I have an agenda. If I say we're going to get out an hour, we get out in an hour. And if we're going to have meetings every Monday, if we can't meet Monday, there's better be a good reason we're not meeting Monday, right? So it's that consistency, the expectations that we meet at least once a semester with our site-based and at least once a semester with our district education and improvement committees. All of those things are expectations. So I tend to set really high expectations, hoping that they land somewhere near them, knowing they may not achieve those every time. I try to get clear feedback. If you're doing well, I'm going to pat you on the back. But usually it's going to be followed up with, hey, that's great, but here's where our goal, here's where we're trying to get to. So we haven't quite arrived yet. So don't pat yourself too hard on the back. But I think part of it's me being consistent and modeling what's expected. If I see trash on the ground, I'm going to pick the trash up. I know that's a simple thing, but what I do is I show them that I'll do the least job that's required in our district up to the most important job in our district. It doesn't matter. There's no job that's above me, below me. I'm going to do all I can, and I want them to have that same attitude. The clear feedback I kind of alluded to, but I think honest conversations with people about how they're doing is important. We tend to, I use this word earlier, sugarcoat things because we don't want to create conflict. But I think in the right environment, you pull them aside, you get them away from peers, you get them away from other people, and you have an honest conversation with them. Most of the time, they will tell you what's wrong, or they'll tell you what they're not doing or accomplishing if you give them the time. So I think that's important. And of course, I try not to get into the lower level personnel decisions, meaning I want the person that has that makes that decision for that supervisor that makes that decision on that employee needs to be the one making that decision. If it's perceived that that's coming from me or someone in my cabinet or my group of directors, then it's not going to weigh as much as it is. I mean, I look at it this way. Who do you want correcting your problems or your weaknesses? You want it to be your supervisor, not 3 supervisors above. So that's something that's important to me. The other thing that I think is important is that you must evaluate them. I hear so many stories, especially HR stories, where there's a problem with a staff member. They want to let them go. When you go and start studying the facts of the case, there's no evaluations. So I think annual evaluations and honest evaluations about where they stand pays dividends because it sets the standard, it sets the expectation. And if you ever have to disconnect from that employee, that job situation, you have data to back you up. So I think the one way to look at personnel is that they're your friends to an extent. When I use this word loosely, is that you need to be able to sit around the water cooler and talk about the football game or talk about their kids or talk about their family. But as a direct supervisor, you still have to have that balance of, hey, I'm still responsible to you, and I still have to hold you accountable. So when that day comes, you got to walk in and say, hey, come to my office and you talk about something. There's still that thin, even though it may be thin sometimes, a fine line between you and that employee. And I encourage our principals to be that way. And it's the same way we approach the classroom. I expect teachers to keep that important line between teacher and student. And so I think it's the same model that I try to use at this level as well. So consistency, clear feedback, high expectations. And I think you as a leader and as a administrator in a school system, if you are not evaluating your staff annually, not only in violation of most of your policy, but you are doing a disservice, because when it comes time to cut someone loose or to hold someone accountable, now you're in the wrong, because they can come back and say, I haven't been evaluated in 5 years. I thought I was doing great. So.
Well, that kind of blows my mind a little bit about those skills that you were discussing, and it really brings something that really brought something to the forefront of my mind. The relationship between micromanaging and the macro management of your position, is that a skill that you found was an easier transition because of your relationship with your district and kind of going coming up through the ranks of the district that you're in? Or do you feel that that's something that you've had to cultivate through your administrative career?
Yeah, I think it's a process. Some people are country club leaders. They tend to be laid back from jump street and tend to allow things to kind of go, a laissez-faire approach in some ways. I tend to be a little bit more structured and In my younger days, I was way more restrictive and controlled a lot of what was happening and looked at every minute detail. And that's too much. I've learned that over time. But, you know, you live and learn. Transitioning from a assistant superintendent to superintendent, I've learned that I need to let more people make their own decisions and manage their own programs. So I use this term a lot, and it's a Southern kind of thing, but I want to know what's in your gumbo, but I'm not going to stir your gumbo. And I think that my group understands that, you know, I want to know what you're putting in it, but I'm not the one stirring it. I'm not the one cooking it. So that's kind of the way I try to approach it with the staff. And it is getting a little bit better for me, macro managing versus micromanage. I do think the meter's going more of a holistic approach than maybe it would have been 4 or 5 years ago in the same position. And that's just experience, really.
Well, I appreciate you being candid with that response and really letting us in on how that process is going. I like that analogy of the gumbo, letting them stir the gumbo. So I'm going to take and pull up from that. So, and I know you've described a little bit how you've cultivated some levels of communication, but and I know that you've said that you want them to be able to, your central office personnel as well as your campus leaders and personnel, to be able to function autonomously. How do you reconcile and build that relationship between your central office personnel and your campus personnel while still maintaining accountability as a whole?
Good question. I do have a few directors that I trust to work with principals, so I'm not always, because I evaluate my principals. Like I'm the TPES evaluator. So that's important that I be that person, but they also need a buffer. And so I'll use a handful of my directors to, hey, I said, do me a favor, go check on so-and-so and just kind of see what's going on and give them some feedback because I trust your feedback. And I also tell the principals in the same note that you need to reach out to so-and-so or this director or that director and bounce this off of them sometimes before coming to me. And what I'm trying to do there is build collegiality and trust amongst that group. But ultimately, I'm their evaluator. So if they get something wrong with that person, it's not going to adversely affect their evaluation. It just gives them another person to bounce ideas off of. So I use that kind of as a buffer between the staff. I'm big on, I know this is kind of old school, and I've even read some articles where a lot of businesses don't use the kind of chain of command as much anymore. You know, I think even Elon Musk mentioned that you can go straight to him. And sometimes good ideas are missed because they got filtered through so many layers that the idea gets lost. And so I think you have to kind of juggle both of those things, will be available to people, but also create those buffers so that you don't overwhelm yourself with all of these different ideas. What I'm trying to do, I like to know where my central office administrators are at. You want to be a superintendent or not? I've got a handful that want to be, and I got a handful that don't want to be. Doesn't mean I treat them any different. It just means I may give some of those people that want to be superintendents something else to do, or put a little bit more on their plate so that they get a true feel of what it may be like. But I've had people tell me they don't want to be superintendent, and then a year or two later say, I think I've changed my mind. I think I might want to be. And so that's why I try to treat them fairly and equally and hold them accountable for what they are responsible for, but at times have them branch out and try new things. So I have someone who does curriculum instruction, but also have them oversee food service. You say, oh my God, why do you have them do that? Well, I said, well, food service is a federal program. There's all kinds of laws and certain expectations you're supposed to follow. Plus, it allows them to work with what I consider to be paraprofessionals. So now they're working with a whole nother staff that comes with a whole nother set of needs. They're hourly. So they have all these responsibilities to the federal government as well as their hourly employees versus a teacher who are salaried. So it gives you a variety of people to work with and balance things out. And if you can manage both of those types of tasks, you're setting yourself up for, potentially if you want to be a superintendent, you're not going to walk in blindly into some of these things you're going to learn. So that's one thing I try to do. I also try to give my principals autonomy and making decisions. I had a principal make a decision last week on how he wanted to handle something. It was a school-related function, like pep rally type stuff, and it didn't quite work out the way they wanted. But again, I gave them enough rope to do what they needed to do, and then now they've had an opportunity to be reflective and say, "Yeah, this didn't work. Now I can do it this way." And I didn't just come in and tell them no, but I gave them ideas to think about, and then they went out and did it, and then they've come back with their own solution to maybe some of the problems. And so, the more often I have people solving their own problems and solving them and making them better and consistently trying to improve, I wouldn't say the less work I have to do, but the better prepared they are and the more trust that's gleaned from that relationship. So if they do get a job opportunity or if there's a promotion opportunity, I now have basically a laundry list of information that this person can do the job. And so it's important that I see them in action as well as formulating solutions. And something I've had to learn is that when it comes to planning, it's not the plan, it's a plan. And usually I like my plan, right? But it's a plan, not the plan. And so I found that by using that tool in the back of my head, when people bring me problems or want to do something, they may not do it my way or the way I think, but it's a way, not the way.
And just to kind of reiterate that the umbrella meta theme that we have for this interview is campus and district improvement and the strategies that you put forth with that. And I know in our conversations, our private conversations, as well as here today, you've really honed in on the fidelity aspect of district planning and accountability. And I want to move a little bit or to open up the doors towards the equity component in that. And I know with over the last almost 2 years, we've had some really impactful things that have happened. You spoke upon the hurricanes in your area as well. And as we've all been impacted by COVID, I wanted to take a time to really kind of focus in on that and ask you, how has COVID impacted your policy and practices, meeting every child where they need to be over the last 18 months? And if you could kind of explain a little bit more about that process and the rationale from your office, how that has worked.
Well, I came in not long after COVID, basically took over and we shut schools down. So, I had a good month or so before that happened. But we have all these grandiose ideas and what would work, what won't work. And we have all these great plans. And then what sometimes happens is this unexplainable. You can't prepare for it. As much as you want to plan, you plan for the worst case scenario. Sometimes you do really great, and sometimes you plan for the worst. It wasn't enough. And so when it came to COVID, I think a lot of us wouldn't even use the word caught off guard as much as just like, how do we do this? And what allowances are going to be put in place by the state? Because I had a lot of great ideas, but a lot of them weren't legal, at least according to current law. When I say, I don't mean illegal in a bad way. I just mean like we could provide these services if they just let us, but then you had restrictions on attendance, and that's how we get paid in the state of Texas. And then you had all these great scenarios that you could do, but you were limited on what the state was going to allow you to do. So, I guess if you focus on the equity piece, we try to meet the student where they're at. I'll just talk about kids, but at the same time, you have a lot of teacher needs too during this time, a lot of social, emotional things going on in their life too. So you have this fine line between meeting your teachers' needs and your kids' needs. And there's always these rules about, feed the teachers and they won't eat the kids kind of mindset. So you have to kind of balance it out. But when it came to students, you had to try to sell this virtual school program for COVID. And teachers, a lot of them were not what I would consider to be native to technology. Most were immigrants. And so there was this big crevasse of sorts between their willingness to want to do some virtual learning. But we had a lot of these teachers that were willing to try, and we had teachers that were already doing a lot of it. So they had to work as a team and help each other out and balance this out. Now, obviously, based on that situation, we found that virtual learning was not best for everybody. And virtual learning was not best for a majority of students. And so going back face to face was really the key. My district, I will be honest with you, and I'm probably not the best person to ask this question because I'm fairly insulated, meaning we had less than probably 10% choose virtual from the beginning. So was it hard for teachers? Yeah, no matter if you had one student or 20 students wanted virtual that you were teaching, it didn't matter. So it was still work, and it was still extra work. It was still on top of what you were already having to do as a teacher. And then this year we had a spike at the beginning of the year, but we're less than 0.5% district-wide staff and students positive cases. So we went from close to 10 at one point to below 1%. And so we haven't had any cases in almost 3 school days. So we're trending down. So I would say, and we're a voluntary mask school. We didn't put any other than cleaning and doing the things that we thought were practical. We pretty much ran school like we always have. But what are we left with? Here we are now, and we're in a good position to have a normal school year, quote unquote, whatever normal is, and then being reflective of where our kids are coming from. So we have a lot of gaps to make up. Luckily, they're pockets because we mostly had kids in school last year. We had some low attendance and we had some virtual learners, but most of our kids were in school. Almost 90% of our kids came to school at least 95% of the time. So our gap's probably not as big as some other districts, but we do have pockets. We do have areas of concern. Most of them are at the lower levels in elementary because a lot of parents chose not to send their kids to kindergarten. So we had to clean that up. We had several kids of that age group that were missing a lot of school. So attendance-wise, elementary suffered the most. Well, we may not see all of the ramifications of that this year. It may be 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. So our goal is to catch them up now. And so we use interim assessments through the state of Texas, which we find to be very valuable. We are, especially with pre-K, kinder, and 1st and 2nd, we have a 3-pronged approach of beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of year testing that's required. But we're able to kind of gauge their knowledge, their reading levels, where they're at. So when the 1st grade student promotes the 2nd, that 2nd grade teacher finds out where they're at reading, and we have interventions in place. So we've done a lot at that level to try to manage those gaps. I would say our district is fortunate that we have a supportive community that wanted our kids back in school quickly, that were willing to sacrifice some comforts and fears and send them to school, which ultimately we hope pays dividends in the end with their success, and that we hope that COVID's a blip in the radar. When we look back 10 years from now, when these kindergartners are graduating or close to graduating, that's just something that happened, and it's not something that prevents them from being successful. So I'm probably not the best to ask because I feel like our approach to COVID was we're going to be clean. We're going to, when we were required to enforce masks, we would force those masks. Once they became voluntary, we transitioned away. And we had enough community support on those things that I didn't have to fight a lot of those battles. The biggest battle we had to fight was getting kids here, because I do think COVID did take a toll on people's attitude about attendance. And we're having to reprogram people to say, no, you have to be at school, And so that's been a challenge. But outside of that, Chris, I really think that we are moving in the right direction there. But the interim assessment program, local assessments that we have put in place, and then just our teachers, being consistent and providing the feedback that we need to make best decisions are what's going to really pay off. My hope is to be mindful of COVID, but not let it control what we do.
Oh, I appreciate that. Eloquently spoken about. You made a couple points about community support and how you got to those places with having that community support was a key essential for you to be able to move forward in the process and get to where you guys are now and your district is right now. I did want to ask a little bit, you spoke about it earlier that there was a time period where you felt that the legislation or the legality of being able to, that there was a hindrance in being able to provide everything that you wanted versus comparisons to where you were at and what was being allowed. Does any of the current legislation affect your ability to engage your stakeholders now, or do you feel that there's an hindrance, or positive or negative, to affect or engage your stakeholders in your district?
Well, what's funny to me, and this is just my opinion, there's times where the legislative branch, when it comes to education, they want to be hands off, especially when it comes to money and funding things. So we got those unfunded mandates. So the things that teachers and administrators are probably good at, they want to do. The things that we aren't the best at, such as understanding the crazy funding formula, they want to leave it to us and say, hey, y'all figure it out and hope you get it right. So I'll give you a prime example of that. House Bill 4545. If you're familiar with that House bill, that's the accelerated instructional program to try to catch kids up. Well, if you've read that, it is very meticulous. It is very prescribed, like a prescription. But it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in some of the things they're asking us to do. And so you can tell it probably wasn't written by a teacher. So those are the things that I mean by them telling us how to get our kids caught up and prepare them and get them through a tough situation. They're not leaving that to us. They're saying, you have to do these things. And if you don't, these are the things that are going to happen. But when it comes to money and funding and tax rates and all these other things, they're leaving that to us, try to figure it out. So I would rather them spend more time helping us on the funding side and stay out of the business of educating kids, which we're the profession. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that. So are there hindrances? Yeah, because the way that House Bill 4545 was written, I've got to go back to the teacher the year before and get them on this committee and pull them out of a classroom they're trying to instruct. And then the way the state's set up with testing, some years we have writing, some years we don't, some years we have science, some years we don't, some years we have social studies. So I've got to provide accelerated instruction for a kid who doesn't take a social studies test for 2 years, but this next year they have to do it. And the federal government doesn't require those. It only requires math and reading in certain subjects. So we could have made House Bill 45 much more manageable and kept teachers in classrooms and kept them focused on the task at hand instead of chasing things that may or may not matter 2 years from now. But it is what we're left with. And there was during the second session, there was a representative at Huberty that tried to get some adjustments that were more realistic, but it never made it out of the House due to timing. But that's just a prime example to me where I feel like our hands are tied, where we could have done a whole lot more if they'd have given us a shot at managing the students. Because, no one came in when we had Hurricane Harvey hit and I missed 19 days of school. The state didn't come in and tell me how to get our kids caught up.
Right.
We made it work, but the whole state deals with COVID. Now they're telling us how we have to do and get kids caught up when it may not fit our community. And that's disappointing.
Speaking of your community and legislation, and kind of think about it, in any of those communities, we have those community leaders and stakeholders that are more legislative savvy than others that you have in your community. How do you, as a superintendent and even a board, how do you, your team of 8, how do y'all disseminate that or explain this information that you kind of just talk to me about in this setting? How do you disseminate it in a positive manner, or even dispel misconceptions or fears about certain legislation that comes through?
Yeah. Well, luckily, we're members of certain groups like TASB, TASBO, TASA. These organizations help filter out some of the minutia that's tied to these legal documents and really get it down to the nitty gritty. Periodically, I'll get wind of something and I reach out to legislators that are in our area, and they're pretty good about getting back with me and responding. And so sometimes I hear things before they hit the books. Sometimes we miss things. But one thing that I really try to do is take that data that comes from maybe those agencies and put it in layman's terms for the board. But I do have a very highly responsive board too that read and are updated on things. And so I don't have to do a whole lot of middle road communication with them, but we do with parents a lot of times. So I provide them, if I see a legislative update, for example, and it's got 10 points, I will forward that on to our board of trustees, and I will either dissect it or I will say, we're cool with House Bill 33, House Bill 62, and Senate Bill 4. But I have concerns about blankety blank, and I have a email ready to go to legislators I'm working on now. And then what I do is I blind carbon copy them in my email to that legislator, Senate or House, and they see my response and what my concerns are. So if they follow that email chain and that communication, my board should be up to date. And then what I do at our board meetings is I highlight any of those types that I'm concerned about during legislative sessions. That's every other year. And, sometimes we don't feel the effects of some type of legislative decision for a year or two down the road. They don't often understand maybe something they enacted, the ramifications. So some of that is navigating through those and know what's coming down the pike, 2 or 3 years down the road. Most of that's financial. So I think it's really, people are busy. People are not paying attention to certain things, and they tend to not understand, which is, I live in this world, they don't. So I just do my best to hit the highlights, give them as much feedback, and then provide them like that transparency. I said, it's there. Here it is. You can read it if you want, if you choose to. But I at least hit on the majors. And then, of course, I utilize other superintendents in the county and other areas in the region, and we get a lot of support there. So I'm not on an island by myself. We'll sit down and we'll talk about certain bills, and then we'll come up with a solution or a plan as a team. And so what we're doing looks a lot the same in our county because the same superintendents got together and planned this thing out. So those are approaches that we take. But, I have more people show up for a mask meeting than I do for adopting a textbook. So I may get 50 people show up because they hear we're going to incorporate masks or we're going to make kids wear masks, mandated, which we never even talked about. But they show up to make sure we all know that they don't believe in masks, by golly. But we're about to adopt this important textbook and like nobody shows. Or we're about to do this big thing that's going to help kids and nobody's here. So it just depends on what's going on, and you just try to be as transparent as you can and nip things in the bud before they do. And it's definitely a challenge sometimes especially in this political environment we're in right now.
Well, I thank you for that wonderful insight and a little kernel of future questionnaires that I can come back and ask you in the near future about how that's moving forward and progressing. Well, I thank you so much. I know your time is precious and valuable, and I speak on that same point about consistency. We explained the time period that we're going to have. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. But I wanted to really thank you for this opportunity that you've given and provide insight on your district. And it sounds like you guys are doing a wonderful job there, and look really forward to continuing our conversations as we move through the superintendency.
Yes, sir. Good luck on your project and good luck on your future endeavors in your dissertation.
Well, thank you, sir. You have a wonderful day.